You think it's love, but it's not. It feels like discovery, like arrival, like something sacred has finally been found. But look closer. What you're calling love might actually be your own disappearance. It's not a revelation you're experiencing. It's retreat. Not a step toward truth, but a step back from becoming. The sensation that sweeps you up isn't evidence that you've connected to something real. It's often proof that you've surrendered something vital. Your own process, your unfolding, the core of your identity in motion, and you handed it over not because she asked for it, but because deep down you were searching for relief from the weight of being incomplete. The philosopher Hegel taught that the self doesn't emerge fully formed. It's sculpted in tension, through contradiction, through engagement with resistance. Who you are is not a fixed essence. It's a dialogue, a constant confrontation between your inner world and the outer one, between your need to be free and the boundaries that test that freedom. And yet, many men abandon this dialogue the moment they fall too deep into someone else. They don't grow with love, they dissolve into it. They stop wrestling with who they could become and start hiding behind the comfort of being wanted. When Hegel spoke of recognition, he didn't mean the shallow kind we see on screens. Not attention, not compliments. He meant something far more profound. The existential need to be acknowledged as a free being by another free being. But there's a catch. It must be mutual. If you offer your whole self to someone who has not chosen of their own strength to truly see you, you aren't recognized. You're absorbed. And instead of gaining selfhood, you lose it. You called it devotion, but it was evasion. You thought you were choosing love when really you were choosing safety. Because it's easier to be reflected than to stand on your own. It's easier to be seen through her eyes than to build a vision of yourself that doesn't require validation. That's what Hegel warns against, the illusion of recognition that leads not to freedom, but to bondage. You thought you were a man showing commitment. But commitment without internal strength is dependence dressed up as loyalty. The moment you need someone else's gaze to feel real, you've already lost. You're not standing, you're leaning. And when she pulls back, everything collapses. You're not mourning love. You're mourning the crutch that held your self-image upright. You don't miss her as much as you miss the feeling of having a center, even if it was borrowed. Hegel's master-slave dynamic wasn't about chains or physical subjugation. It was about identity, about how quickly a person who has not confronted themselves can become enslaved to the one whose attention they crave. That's why the pain cuts so deep when she leaves. It's not just rejection, it's existential erosion. You weren't just connected to her. You were dependent on her for access to yourself. Your entire sense of being was woven through her perception of you. And the moment that thread snapped, everything unraveled. You were never standing on solid ground. That's why it hurts so much now. Because you mistook comfort for completion. You mistook her reflection for your reality. And when it disappeared, you were left not just with heartbreak, but with the terrifying question you'd been avoiding all along. Who am I without her gaze? This isn't an accusation, it's an awakening. Not condemnation, but confrontation. You must now admit that what you built wasn't love. It was an escape hatch from becoming. You turned her into a screen to project your unresolved questions. Your longing wasn't for intimacy. It was for refuge. You handed her the unfinished work of your soul and expected her to complete it. But no one else can finish a project they didn't begin. She couldn't make you whole. Because wholeness doesn't come from connection. It comes from contradiction. That's the fire Hegel speaks of, the furnace of becoming. the breaking, the discomfort, the isolation that precedes emergence. The man who avoids that fire will keep seeking shelter, not love, shelter. He'll keep calling it romance, keep writing poems about it, but in truth he's hiding from the jagged truth that selfhood must be earned, not gifted, and that love, when entered without clarity, becomes a tool of avoidance. You thought you were feeling deeply, but what you were doing was outsourcing your responsibility to grow. You handed her your self-definition, your future, your emotional oxygen, and you called that act noble. But Hegel would call it an abdication. You fled the battlefield of self-construction and set up camp in her approval. It felt warm, it felt peaceful, but it was an illusion, a dangerous one. Because the moment she changed, the entire world you built inside her eyes began to decay. It wasn't the breakup that broke you. It was the exposure. You saw the truth, probably for the first time, that you hadn't truly become anything solid. That all your depth, all your emotion, all your supposed passion was actually scaffolding. Temporary supports for a structure you never really built. You thought love was about giving, but the kind of giving you practiced was possession in disguise. You gave, yes, but you gave with the hope of being confirmed. You gave to be seen. You gave to be validated. And when that validation dried up, you felt like a ghost. Hegel's philosophy is clear on this. The self that hasn't passed through the fire of negation, the struggle, the rupture, the undoing, is not yet a self at all. It's a placeholder, a draft, and the pain you feel isn't proof of lost love. It's proof that the work of becoming was never completed, or maybe never even begun. Look at how you acted, how you twisted your speech, how you concealed your doubts, how you shaped yourself to remain acceptable in her eyes. That wasn't authenticity, that was performance. And the more you performed, the further you drifted from who you could have become. Every compliment you chased, every silence you feared, every moment you anxiously waited for her gaze to land on you, those were the rituals of someone who doesn't know who he is without another's approval. The tragedy isn't that she left. The tragedy is that her presence ever made you feel real. That's the lie that must be uprooted. Hegel doesn't romanticize suffering, but he does say that it's necessary, not just to hurt, but to understand what that hurt is pointing to. And in your case, it's pointing to a hollow structure held together by someone else's smile. You can't move forward until you see this clearly, until you stop pretending that what you gave up was love. You gave up comfort, familiarity, escape, and now that it's gone, you're standing in a silence you've never learned to bear, a silence that demands something terrifying, self-construction. This is the beginning, not the end, and it must start with solitude, not as punishment, but as sacred space. A clearing where the performance stops, where the questions arise, where the fragments of who you thought you were begin to speak honestly. You want to grow? Then stop reaching for another mirror. Let the ache speak. Let the emptiness echo. Because that silence, that void, that is not the end of your story. It's the threshold. It's where Hegel says the real work begins, where the false collapses and the possible starts to breathe. It's not easy, but it's honest. And honesty is the first step toward actual freedom, not the kind of freedom that comes from being untethered, but the kind that comes from standing rooted in a self you did the labor to build. The man who avoids this labor is not alive in the fullest sense. He is animated by reaction. He is shaped by the gaze of others. He is motivated by fear of absence. That's not vitality, that's survival, and it is no foundation for love. Because love, real love, can only exist between two beings who already stand, who have faced themselves, who do not seek completion but connection. And that kind of connection doesn't collapse, because it was never built on illusion. It was built on truth. And truth, while not always beautiful, will always endure. You want to know where your power begins? Right there, in that unbearable space where nobody is watching, where no eyes meet yours, no voices echo back your longing, no warmth cushions the cold of your solitude. That is where becoming begins. That is where everything false falls away. The illusions that wrapped you in safety, the projections you cast on others to shield you from your own absence, those begin to burn off like mist at dawn. It's not glorious, it's not poetic, but it is sacred. Because finally, you're no longer living through someone else's attention. You're beginning to breathe in your own name. Hegel knew what this silence meant. He called it negation, the necessary destruction of what is unreal, so that what is real can emerge. Not just a loss, not just a void, but a furnace where false identities are incinerated, where dependency dies screaming and something sharper, stronger, begins to shape itself from the ash. You don't get to bring comfort with you into this fire. You don't get to keep your old stories, the ones where love saves you, where she fills the hole, where pain is proof of depth. All of that has to go, because the truth is heavier than the fantasy, and you cannot carry both. The more you run from that truth, the more the pattern repeats. You'll fall again and again and again, each time mistaking the rush of being seen for the fulfillment of being known. But what you're chasing isn't love. It's anesthesia. You want relief. You want your ache silenced, not understood. So you fall into her, hoping she'll soothe what you refuse to study. That is not romantic. That is not deep. That is avoidance wrapped in poetry. And Hegel would not let you hide behind that. He would strip the metaphor away, expose the mechanism beneath, and he would ask you the only question that matters. When will you begin the labor of becoming? Because that's what it takes, labor, thought, struggle. Not the kind that wins applause or earns sympathy, but the kind that rewires your spirit. That teaches you to live without being fed by external validation. You must learn to speak your own name without hearing it echoed back. You must become someone who does not disappear when no one is looking, someone who can walk into silence and not crumble. You thought love would save you, that it would bring meaning, that it would wipe away the question that's haunted you for years. Am I enough? But love, when built on need, only delays that question. It doesn't answer it. It covers it with moments, with smiles, with bodies. But the question waits. It waits until the music fades, until the bed is empty, until the silence returns. And then it whispers, louder than before. You want to escape it again? Or will you stay this time? Will you face the absence instead of filling it? Because here's the thing most men never learn. Absence is not your enemy. It's your forge. The place where resilience is tempered, where desire transforms into discipline, where feeling becomes philosophy. Not the kind you read, but the kind you bleed for. You must stop being afraid of being unseen. Stop letting the lack of her gaze feel like a wound. You're not bleeding because she left. You're bleeding because she was your bandage. Now you get to heal without it, slowly, painfully, honestly. And you must know this. The pain is not a punishment. It's a portal. It's the door to the self you never dared to meet. The one who doesn't perform, who doesn't beg, who doesn't mold himself to be palatable. The one who simply is, who simply endures, who builds quietly, inwardly, without applause. When Hegel wrote of the spirit's journey, he didn't describe it as linear or clean. He described it as violent, rupturing, full of contradiction, because contradiction is the birthplace of awareness, and you, if you're honest, have lived contradiction your entire life, craving wholeness while refusing the fragmentation it demands, wanting love while skipping the solitude that makes it possible. That's the contradiction tearing you open now.
But this rupture is your teacher, not your curse.
She was never meant to complete you. She was never the end of your story. She was just a mirror, reflecting back what you had not built. And now that the mirror is gone, the building begins. You must shape a self that doesn't vanish in her absence, a self that is not reaction, but reality, a self that isn't defined by how much you give to others, but by how deeply you've wrestled with your own becoming. You can't go back. Not really. Even if you tried, even if she returned, even if her gaze settled on you again, you'd know somewhere inside that it was hollow. Because you've seen now what you gave away. You handed her the burden of your identity and called it love, and no matter how gently she carried it, it was never hers to bear. So what now? You begin again, not with grand declarations or emotional rituals, but with stillness, with thought, with the quiet daily effort of rebuilding. You begin by waking up and not reaching for your phone to see if she's thought of you. You begin by looking at yourself, not in the mirror, but in the moments when no one is watching, and asking, who am I without her?
And if the answer is silence, then stay there. Don't flee it. Let it stretch. Let it echo. Let it draw out the part of you that's been silent all along.
You begin by writing not to impress but to understand. You begin by sitting with the ache and not numbing it, not replacing it, not jumping into another body to forget, but feeling it fully until it teaches you what you need to learn. You begin by creating, not for validation, not for applause, but to place something in the world that did not exist before. Something born not of romance, but of resistance, because resistance is sacred. It means you're alive in the fight, and that fight against delusion, against dependency, against the softness that tempts you to disappear again, is the only thing that can make you free. You want to know why Hegel matters? Because he didn't offer shortcuts. He didn't promise peace. He offered a mirror so sharp it could cut you. And in the bleeding, you'd see the truth. Becoming is not about being found. It's about being forged. The next time love appears, you will know. You will feel it not as a rescue, but as a meeting. Not as salvation, but as companionship. You will not vanish into it. You will not rearrange your identity to hold it. You will walk toward it as someone whole. And if it chooses to stay, it will not stay because you begged. It will stay because it recognizes you, not as a boy longing to be seen, but as a man who already is. That is what recognition means. Two subjects meeting without collapse. Two selves standing without leaning. Two souls, neither of which are begging for completion, but offering clarity. And if she walks away, you do not fall.
Because you are no longer built on borrowed validation. You are no longer a house constructed out of someone else's affection. You are your own ground. You carry your worth not in someone's gaze, but in your gaze. Not in her love, but in your integrity. This is not about bitterness. It's not about building walls or pretending you don't care. You care deeply. But you've stopped letting that care control you. You've stopped handing over your power in exchange for attention. You've stopped confusing longing with truth. You are no longer chasing the reflection. You are becoming the source. So when you feel that familiar ache, when the old habits arise up, texting, scrolling, fantasizing, waiting, pause, breathe. Remember, that's the old self begging to return. But you are no longer that self.
You are no longer the man who disappears when he is not loved. You are the man who remains. And when the ache whispers, remind it. We are doing the work now. We are no longer outsourcing our becoming. We are no longer begging to be seen. We are learning to see, to stand, to speak in our own voice without needing it to be echoed. That's how real love will find you. Not when you're aching to be completed, but when you no longer need to be. Not when you're searching for mirrors, but when you've shattered them all.
So if you're hurting right now, if you're broken and raw and full of regret, don't numb it. Don't run. That pain is your invitation. That silence is your passage. That emptiness is your proof that something false has finally died and something real is ready to live.
This is where it starts, not with her, not with anyone, but with you. And this time, you won't fall. You'll rise.